Hi guys, it's Katie Beck again with my oral explanation for Gestalt psychology. However, you probably noticed by now this subject is broad enough to cover a whole chapter. So I've decided to mainly focus on the Gestaltist ideas of perception. Now, before I switch my camera, I want to leave a couple slides up to explain perceptual constancy. Perceptual constancy is important for us to make sense of our environment. The book explains that it is how we know something is the same, even if its perceived size, shape, or brightness changes. My Psychology 1101 professor explained this in a way that's been easy for me to understand and remember. So when you're lying in bed at night with the lights dim and your bedroom door open, you don't think of the door as being a trapezoid, even though when it's open, that's the shape it makes. We know that the door itself is still a rectangle, so we perceive it as a rectangle. So that is the idea behind perceptual constancy. So speaking of perceptual constancy, the empirists thought that perceptual constancy was learned. However, the Gestaltists hypothesized that it results from the fact that the relationship between objects tends to remain the same. So when the position of our bedroom door changes as it opens and closes, its relation to the stuff in the hallway behind it doesn't change. This idea led to perceptual Gestalten. These Gestalten are specific ways that visual information tends to be arranged. While the textbook says that Gestaltists define more than 100 of them, it specifically highlights two. So the first one in the textbook is the figure-ground relationship, which is what I personally think of in relation to Gestalt psychology. This has to do with the fact that some visual stimuli, the figure and the background within it can become interchangeable. Like the image I have at the beginning of this video, it can be seen as either one vase or two faces looking at each other. There are many examples of this visual wonder online, and they're tons of fun to Google. There's also a couple examples in the textbook on page 448. The second major Gestalten that the book covers are the principles of perceptual organization, which consists of the following principles. The definitions of most of them can be found in the chapter glossary on page 464. So the principle of continuity, which states that when stimuli follow a predictable pattern, they're seen as a single unit instead of multiple images or stimuli. The principle of proximity says that when stimuli are physically close to each other, they tend to be grouped together. And then the principle of inclusiveness, which is not in the chapter glossary, it's on pages 448 and 449, says that there are multiple figures, that one containing the most stimuli is more likely to be seen. And then lastly, the principle of closure states that incomplete objects tend to be perceived as whole or complete. So images exemplifying these principles can be found on page 449, and they were super helpful for me when trying to understand the different principles. As we can see from these principles of organization, our brain tends to show us what it wants to, rather than what's going on in the real world. So Gestaltist Kurt Kafka realized this and described it. What he calls the geographical environment is what truly exists, or what's really happening, and then the behavioral environment is our interpretation of the geographical environment. Because of this, our perception of the world is more predictive of our behavior than the world itself is. So like the textbook explains, 3 different people can be looking at the exact same tree and see a playground, a death trap, or a specimen, respectively, based on each person's subjective reality. That's all I have on Gestalt psychology, and have a good week.